Right, looks like we are on here. Hi, welcome back. It's Kevin Spiker again with another episode of my little fireside chats here. Hope everybody's doing well out there in quarantine land. Um, Tonight, I wanted to talk a little bit about some other aspects of my wellness training and just curiosities. An idea called rewilding, which in some terms refers to rewilding of an environment, letting it go back to nature. But I'm going to be mostly referring to the idea of human rewilding and looking back to our ancestors for answers to some of our modern crises as we are currently experiencing. So, thank you if you're tuning in, and if you have some questions, hang on to them for a little bit. I'm going to do a Q&A after I get through some of the topics I wanted to go over, and then we can kind of open it up for a little forum towards the end. So I'd like to discuss the basics of rewilding, some of those principles that I've learned through the work of wilderness lovers like Arthur Haynes, Daniel Vitalis, tying that into some of the studies of the Weston Price Foundation, and then bringing it all together with some poignant thoughts from some of the farmers we support at the end. So I've always liked sharing the voices of our farmers and our farming families, especially since many of them are Amish and they have a healthy disconnect from the kind of the madness going on in our civilized world. So it's really nice to hear their perspective on things, and we'll get to some of that in a bit. So, hey, Julian, hi. I'm gonna try to deal with the pop-up windows as they come a little bit here. So yeah, let me get into some of what rewilding is and how I kind of discovered it. It actually came about during my explorations of ancestral food choices, getting connected to farms like over 10 years ago, and along the way we had discovered the idea of harvesting spring water, and I was very fascinated by that, and set out to find springs in the area via findaspring.com. And through that, the creator of that, Daniel Vitalis, I ended up getting very fascinated with what he had to say about modern life and dietary lifestyle choices. And I was fortunate enough to actually get to a weekend retreat with featuring Daniel Vitalis called Intrinsic Taboos, and that took place up in Alex Gray's Chapel of Sacred Mirrors up in upstate New York, and that was just a fabulous place to learn about ourselves from the inside out, and some of our more primordial functions and instincts and things. So that really lit the fire for me to bring it all together with the indigenous studies of Weston Price. And suddenly everything really started to gel for me on how to make better decisions about what to eat, how to live my life, and how to tap into a lot of the innate abilities and immune abilities and healing properties that our bodies come with. Hey, Elaine. And Mariana, hi. Everybody's tuning in now. Yay! Glad to see you guys all here. If you missed anything here, I'm just going over some of the basics of rewilding, which is a big lifestyle practice for me. It helps me make good decisions about what to eat, how to care for my body, minor wounds at least, and minor illnesses, which can be handy, especially if right now if the medical system's a little bogged down and distracted. I think it's good to kind of learn how to self-regulate and self-heal and do self-care strategies. Um, so what rewilding explores is the fundamental differences of how our wild ancestors, back, we're talking 200,000 years ago, we had become this model of monkey in a sense, Homo sapien. That's And that number actually keeps moving back. We keep finding older and older evidence about our what we know now to be sort of our modern model of mankind, like all the parts, all the structure, everything there in terms of how we know human beings to be. So that's been going on for a very long time. So 200,000 years ago, we were sort of the top of the heap when it came to ape men, and we really carried on our reign here. But during that time, we really were much more nomadic. We lived in harmony with the environment. Um, we traveled. We didn't gather or live in groups of more than about like 150 people on average, and we were very self-sufficient. We gave back to the earth as we consumed and lived in harmony with nature. Um, as we developed, we took on partners, animal partners along the way. The first being, notably, dogs, and in that time, it was really the gray wolves. So somehow back in the day, some very adventurous wolves had started to come closer and closer to the campgrounds of early man, and I imagine we probably threw them some scraps and started to win them over and tame them down a little. And sooner or later, we had hunting partners, and we were able to really enhance our ability to gather food, wild food, living food, and with the help of these new partners of ours. But we really didn't mess around with their breeding to actually create what we now call dogs. So, for I've heard estimates of 100,000 years, man and wolf were separate partners, and that's pretty fascinating to me because we stayed out of their business in a sense and let them be wolves. Let the wolves be wolves, and the humans were humans, and we were all living out our best expressions of ourselves. So, but around the time where we began to tinker with agriculture and domestication of plants, domesticating of wolves began. We're thinking, 10, 15,000 years ago was when the wolf started to get morphed into the dog, and we transformed them into much more of a pet than a partner. So when we talk about rewilding, we're talking about trying to tap into that sort of wisdom that came prior to us beginning to meddle too much with genetics in a sense. Because, in a sense, dogs and the other domesticated animals and the other domesticated plants that we grow are really some of the first GMOs, genetically modified organisms, in a sense, because though it was done through hybridization, a more natural and forgiving process that either works or doesn't, but if nature allows it, we were able to create new breeds of things, new variations on a wolf, new variations on cows, pigs, sheep, chickens, and even then the garden variety plants that we know, based on what we would call a wild progenitor. Progenitor meaning that there was at one time a wolf behind all the dogs we know, and at one time there was Queen Anne's lace behind every carrot, and brassica behind every head of broccoli. And so when I refer to the word wild progenitor, that means that it's the really life's original version, the version that sprung from the wild world. And when we talk about domesticated variations of that, we're talking about once we began to sort of tinker with things. We bred out a lot of the fierceness of wolves and made them more docile and friendly and easy to work with, manageable. Um, so there are a couple of main characteristics of what we call domestication. So one is that we've altered various characteristics of these living things. So we've altered the temperament, for one, like I just mentioned. We bred out that wildness of the animals that we wanted to tame and make use of to help our civilizations and our growing cultures. So we tamed things down. We pretty much obliterate their normal social hierarchy. So in a wolf pack, there was always like an alpha wolf, while mankind now kind of steps in and becomes that alpha wolf. And so we dissolve any sort of social structure that that creature once had. We definitely alter the diet of anything that's domesticated, so any animals that are domesticated. So, meaning that in modern times, sadly, dogs and cats and pets are fed a lot of grain foods, which is really not their natural proclivity to consume. In fact, they're not really geared well to digest that stuff at all. So we see pets getting people diseases along the way and things like that. So that's all thanks to domestication. And finally, most importantly, is that we take control of their breeding. And there's really only a few species on the entire planet that have given themselves over, for whatever reason, to mankind taking control of the breeding process for them, and thus steering them and altering them in phenomenal ways. When you think about a gray wolf somehow making it down a very long train to become something like a Chihuahua or very, very small pocket dogs, you got to wonder how long did it take, and what on earth, how can we keep crossing breeds to finally arrive at something so selected and so sort of far from the natural progenitor? No offense to dogs, it's just that they all are a subset of a gray wolf, which is a very imposing creature to try to keep in your house. People have tried it, and it fails miserably. As pups, they're all right, but they start to get their wild instincts back, and it's not good. So, and I think even there's an experiment that's been going on for decades in Russia to create the silver fox, which is a pet fox. And it takes a very long time to breed out the wildness of a creature. So they're still at it, and I don't think I want to be the first guinea pig to try out a wild, what was once very recently a wild fox species into my house. But so those are the general characteristics of domestication. Now, what's fascinating is when you take those four characteristics and you apply it to, say, mankind, you start to realize that perhaps we are a self-domesticating species, the first ever of its kind on the planet, where we have now reduced our wild temperament down to being much more docile than our ancestors. We have a social hierarchy that isn't established through the natural sort of wilder process of, earning your way to the top of the heap and being a leader and a shaman, perhaps. The diet, of course, has changed. In fact, it's really hard to pin down what the wild human diet was. We can theorize, but because fossil records only really show the hardened fossilized things, it's hard to know. It's hard to even know when we were using bows and things, when anything made out of wood or anything is long gone. So, but the consensus is that the consumption of animal-based products and the rendering and the use of fire was crucial in growing our brains to the capacities that we have today. And we did very little in terms of clearing land and trying to grow things. We were much more adapted for hunting and whatnot, at least in distant history. Now, like I was saying, around 12 to 15,000 years ago, we did begin to settle as people. We became less nomadic. We changed wolves into dogs, and we began to create harvestable plants and variations on plants that if you were to see the wild progenitor of something like eggplant or tomato, I mean, these things were bitter little berries in their original form. And to know that we've bred these things into something that's much more sweet and maybe tasty and visually appealing and can stand up to the rigors of truck and plane and boat transportation, that's a far cry from the wild progenitors that we once knew. And so that's, in terms of diet, it's a great strategy for me to try to seek out truly wild foods, because if you take a little walk, a little stroll, if you ever leave your house anymore, I don't remember the days when you would go for a stroll through the grocery store and not be 6 feet apart and wearing a mask, but the good old days. If you go through the produce section there, pretty much everything you're seeing there is a domesticated form of food, and that was a shocker for me to swallow. I remember learning a lot about that at Dano Vitalis's weekend retreat, and I never went into a store the same way again, knowing that one single progenitor, for instance, wild progenitor Brassica, which looks a little like Queen Anne's lace, just a little thin, wispy white flower, a pretty modest looking plant, could lend itself to such variation through breeding that we get everything from spinach, cauliflower, broccoli, radicchio. There's so many branches out of that single wild progenitor that it gives this illusion of variety when we stroll around that very pretty, bright, vibrant produce section. We're not really realizing that even things like bananas are a cultivar of only about 200 years, let's say, maybe more now. But bananas weren't necessarily something wild and something even that monkeys ate, like the old, the picture in your mind of a monkey peeling a banana. Not really the case. That's a monkey in a zoo. And bananas are the newest breed of banana, the Kavanaugh, is actually slated for extinction probably within maybe my lifetime or some of the millennials out there due to an unstoppable blight that's knocking it out. So the things we really take for granted in the food world that we've come to know as staples and everyday things are very often just these newly cultivated hybrids, much less nutrient dense than any kind of wild progenitors, and really the target for a lot of pesticides and artificial propping up fertilizers and practices that damage the land and aren't leaving good soil for the next generation, and leaving a lot of runoff in the rivers and knocking out fish there, and a whole host of problems when we start digging up land and misusing it to create our food supply. So now another, just speaking of monkeys and bananas, people may be saying, well, of course there's more than just a couple of domesticated creatures. When you go to a zoo, there's hundreds and thousands of different species of animal. But keep in mind that what a zoo is doing is trying its best to emulate the natural settings and the natural diet of the creatures that are camped out there, shall we say. Some of them are there because maybe they've been injured or really need our help. Maybe others have been captured purely for our amusement. So however you slice it, that is not what I would count as a domesticated creature. And when I say domesticated, I'm talking about creatures that have literally changed physically, very visibly and mentally and everything else from their wild progenitors. So if anybody out there thinks that the black and white spotted cows walking around in the field are some sort of a wild animal that we've harnessed for their products and whatnot, that is something that mankind created a very long time ago from something called the auroch, which was just a massively horned oxen, like badass steer that who knows how on earth they began to tame that down into the docile cattle that we see today. But we have a lot of respect, I think, to give our ancestors, at least for putting in the effort over many generations, I'm sure, that it took to get a tame, very abundantly producing animal to be our partner through development of our civilization. I truly believe that without our animal partners, we wouldn't have made it as nearly as far and as quickly. But maybe we would have actually stayed more to our foraging and primal ways. So who knows? But the cat's out of the bag now. The genie's out of the bottle. And we can't unring that bell. That's my favorite new saying. So Now, other things that we've domesticated out of wild progenitors would be like hogs or pigs that came from like a wild boar that we still see today on the edgelands, and any kind of chickens and things are definitely not a wild creature. They were wild fowl, things like more like a pheasant or something like that we were able to lure in with food and eventually start taking over their breeding process. And many animals, like I think the running joke is about these pandas that they keep getting to try to mate. It's like there are creatures that really resist our efforts to domesticate them, that want to remain wild and will sooner die and perish than be giving themselves over to our process of artificial insemination and selective breeding to create the perfect version of them. So, as with dogs, we have cats, cats that came from more like a wild bobcat. And sadly, things like bobcats were really erased from the ecosystem as we settled and spread ourselves across landscapes. We don't see the wild predators anymore that once kept things like deer in check. So now we have to become the wild predator in a sense and keep them in check in more modern ways. And hopefully we're doing that wisely and with the best interests of the deer in mind. Um, so that's the basics of domestication and how I use rewilding as a lens to put our modern lives through. And I want to emphasize that I'm not trying to roll back the clock, and I'm not saying that we all need to just drop every modern device and get back to foraging and live in caves and sit by campfires. No, but to acknowledge where we came from and doing that for the vast majority of our existence as Homo sapiens, I think says a lot. And I think that starting to unlock our immune abilities with that kind of wisdom, unlocking our just physical strength and prowess and things that have been dulled down by domestication. Being aware that you can awaken instincts and even bodily functions, I feel. The functioning of your skin to perform better, the functioning of your digestion and your just that digestive fire to return for you that our ancestors had, and our cleverness, our inventiveness, all that lies in there. If we start to just maybe put down the devices a little more and start to meditate our way back into that mindset, I've really found great results with looking back in time for a lot of answers for modern problems. So now in the Western price world, so there we have Daniel Vitalis, the Rewild Yourself world, and that's a great podcast, by the way, Rewild Yourself. And now he's gotten into what's called what is it, Wild Fed, or he's modified his podcast to be more about harvesting wild food and things from the land. So it's pretty interesting stuff out there you can get into. Arthur Haynes was his mentor, and Arthur Haynes is a prolific author and researcher and just a wealth of knowledge about this, and a very inspiring personality. So I encourage you to check him out. Now, if we apply this knowledge into the more of the Weston A. Price Foundation realm, which I work with and teach for, one of the big principles that they put forth is technology as servant. And it's something that I want us to pay attention to at times like this when, number one, we've become highly domesticated of the house, which that means. We've been, just in the moment, in the last few weeks, have been forced back into our domiciles to try to eke out an existence till this blows over. And now all of a sudden being flush with technology, and myself being guilty here as well. I, up until recently, had never been doing Facebook Live talks or anything like that, so I'm making good use of this as well. But always with this mentality, this running mantra of technology as servant, meaning like don't be the tool of the tool. And at all times when utilizing a tool, verify with yourself, check in that I know what I'm using this for, that this has a purpose for me right now, and then when I'm done with it, I can put it back in the toolbox, and it's not going to begin to run my life like certain modern devices and whatnot. Don't be the tool of the tool. Um, so that's one that I'm really holding sacred to me right now as well. That getting, using this technology right now to stay connected is vital, and I get that. Make sure you take a little time now during this quarantine to put down the phone and get off the computer and turn off the TV and return to your primal self in a sense. Get outside if you can, and soak in some sunshine. Put your bare feet onto the ground for at least 20 minutes and discharge all of that pent up energy and the free radicals and the static that's been brewing inside of us, being kind of trapped inside. So, with that in mind, I wanted to take you through some of the pitfalls of being trapped inside, and not to scare you, and not to you know get you super paranoid about anything, but just like a logical approach to having to live indoors. For some of us, this is not easy. For a lot of us, maybe we're just more hermit like in general, and this is kind of great that everybody's finally getting to experience hermit life with you. But for me, I'm pretty restless, I gotta say. So being mindful of some of the lurking toxins in a household that you may take for granted, can be kind of helpful at a time like this. So one thing that I'm making sure to do, luckily it's getting warmer now, but good advice from the rewilding community is through the winter, make sure that you crack open those windows once in a while, even if it's just for a few minutes at a time. Create a wind tunnel if you can. If there's a way to get airflow going, from end to end in your living space, crack them open for a few minutes, let that blow through and refresh the ions in the air, bring in fresh oxygen, because you're inside, and with every exhalation, you're just filling your space up with more carbon dioxide. You're a little greenhouse gas producer, and you're having like your own little mini climate crisis, basically. So definitely air out, let in, even if it's freezing, frigid cold air, you can warm it up again soon enough. But definitely regenerate the air supply in your place as much as possible. If you're just locking yourself in, trust me, I don't think there's anything dangerous that's going to fly through your window in the few minutes that you do air out. So if something like that happens, please don't blame me. But I think at worst there'll probably be a bird flying in or something, because there's just so much nature springing to life without all the humans around right now. But so that's one thing. Another thing to be aware of is that everything in your house, every product, every bit of carpet and pillow and comforter, though minute, is off-gassing plastics and things. That new product smell when you crack open something new and it has that factory plasticky smell. Those are toxins that are building up in your air and in the dust. So I would be fastidious about keeping the dust under control, keeping tidy, being aware that all of these things are just putting out little by little just harmful gases that we don't need, that we need to refresh and get out of the air and get fresh air from outside in, fresh ions, and just fresh energy. I think that there's an energy that comes with the wind. And I've even heard some amazing theories about why birds circle in the air, seemingly like too high to be hunting. And is it recreational? Like, what is it? But they're actually absorbing ions and energy, and refreshing their sort of that spirit, I think, that embodies them. So get a little bit of that spirit back into your house, and don't let the stale air build up. You're probably also burning incense or candles or things to keep it smelling fresh, because it's starting to smell like people have been hanging out in this thing for 2 months now. But just a word of caution, if you're not using more natural forms of candles, such as beeswax, or even some soy ones are okay. you're burning a petrol-based paraffin oil in your house, and that's pretty harmful stuff. I don't want to name any brands, but around Christmas time, and there's certain ones that smell like Christmas trees and things. Yeah, those are the ones I'm talking about. Unfortunately, the scents are petrol based. The actual fuel for the candle is petrol based, and it's almost like having a little mini car just running its engine in your house. So I would definitely caution you against overdoing it with candles unless they're made of beeswax or soy, palm. I've seen. So there's various non-oil based candles you can burn if that's your thing. Um, I'm not crazy about incense. If anything, I would diffuse essential oils. So you can look into getting yourself a good quality diffuser and higher grade essential oils than maybe the run of the mill. Um, and bring some scent and some zest into your life that way. But, with all the closed air right now, just I'd say do your best not to keep filling that with toxins. um, so that's just a little bit about air quality. I mean, we could go down the rabbit hole on that. You can get ionizers, you can get air cleaners, HEPA filters, and etc. And I encourage you to do some research on that. I'm not going to go through much of that right now. Another thing I would really recommend, and at least you can sort of order these things through Amazon or whatever right now, is like a water filter for, especially if you can't do it for your whole property or your whole house, get it for your shower. Because in terms of dousing yourself in chlorinated and possibly fluoridated water on a daily basis, that also becomes vaporized as it comes out of the shower head. And so those chlorine gases and things end up sort of seeping around. And just the more locked in we are, the more we're adding to the toxic load. So if you can imagine what a domesticated human compared to a wild living human, the very few of them that are still left, the indigenous people of the world, a day in the life, for a domesticated human begins with just a torrent of toxins, if you really think about it. Now, we don't think about each single product being deadly, but the combination of the countless combinations of chemicals we endure on a daily basis just to get through our little well scrubbed American lives is pretty staggering if you start to add it up. So imagine you wake up, you rinse with a chemical based mouthwash, you then brush up with fluoridated toothpaste very often. Lots of other colorings and chemicals in that really don't belong in your body. And just because you're not swallowing it doesn't mean anything. We absorb all kinds of things directly through the soft palate of our mouth very readily. That's the primary principle of oil pulling, is to be able to detoxify the blood through that thin membrane at the top of our mouth. So you can't tell me that fluoride isn't making it right up in there, attacking the very pineal gland that we consider to be the heart, the seat of our soul, the third eye. So things like that. Already, it's 8 o'clock, and we've already hit a toxic load of maybe dozens, if not hundreds, of chemicals. Then we get to the breakfast table. Oh, sorry, we shower. So then we jump in the shower and we lather up with lots of fun sodium lauryl sulfates and surfactants and more petrol-based products. We're inhaling the vaporized chlorine and fluoride from the shower head. We're soaking it all up into our skin, drinking a little bit in, getting it in every hole in our body, eyes, nose, and then stepping out to smear on more moisturizer and more chemicals. And we barely made it out of our room yet, let alone get through breakfast, lunch, dinner, a day at whatever job we're at, sitting in traffic, inhaling those fumes. So by the end of the day, a domesticated human has really run the gamut of chemical offenders. So the idea of rewilding becomes a lot more appealing, at least in terms of trying to have a guide for how to keep your body more detoxified and how to decide on what to put in it and put on it on a daily basis. And in fact, it gets to the point where I call this, or we, in the rewilding community would call this a feral mindset. Feral, meaning like, let's say a feral cat was once a domesticated cat and knew all the rules of the game in that world, but eventually may have escaped and started living on its own on the streets, on the mean streets, and calling upon its wild instincts to find food and heal itself and clean itself and survive. So within every cat lies obviously this ability to go feral. I mean, even what we call wild horses are actually feral horses. They were, descendants of the horses brought over by like Spaniards and conquistadors and things that, not really an indigenous creature per se, but more like a feral, a once wild, maybe then domesticated, and now rewilded species. So I like to say I've adopted a feral mindset, even though I still go through the grid. I live on the grid, and I fill out the paperwork and the necessary pains in the butts to be a modern human, pay my bills, and go through the motions. But all the while, in the back of my head, I'm thinking like a feral human. And what am I, analyzing my situation at all times in a survival mindset. And I'm trying to draw on that wisdom of the ancients. So it's been a handy way of going about things for me. Thinking feral, eating wilder, foraging when I can, harvesting spring water, and the magic that comes with all of those decisions. I think is really paying off in spades. So I know we really can't get out there too much right now, but really make an effort to soak up some sun, even if you have to crank open a window and just sit in the shaft of sun coming through for that brief time. Try to get some on your skin, get it in your eyes. Enjoy that feeling. That's giving you free energy. We are a big solar panel, and getting it in our eyes and on our skin is a great thing to do, especially now if we want to start building up a base coat. If we're ever going to get outside again in the summer, let's hope that we can build our base coat now and try to lessen our need for, sunblocks and things, which we'll get into another time. But so for now, we're at over 30 minutes in. If anybody's tuned in, it's hard to know, but do you have any questions? Please type them now. And in the meantime, I will be calling up a few quotes from the farmers that I source from. So just a friendly reminder, we are still looking for more drivers, more site hosts, more promoters, marketers, and just back-end workers for the farm-to-table options we're bringing for people and doing home deliveries in the time of need here. And beyond. We've been doing the home deliveries and everything prior to this. It's just suddenly the demand just went through the roof, and everybody's really working hard to meet the demands. All of these local farmers and the local purveyors are just incredibly swamped, but happily so. And let's keep it coming, but we're going to need more of a support staff and an infrastructure as we continue to grow our efforts. So message me if that is of interest, no matter where you are. I know of farmers in the outer Philadelphia towards Lancaster area, and a lot of those same farmers are servicing North Jersey and New York, Long Island. So no matter where you are, if you're tuning in, hit me up. We can always hook you up with another, say, a Weston Price chapter leader in your area that has resources on farmers that may need your help, or at least you can source and get some home deliveries for yourself going through those channels. So with one of those farmers in mind from like the Honeybook area, great guy named Sam who does pasture-raised animal products and produce and things like that, and he's stayed true to his Amish ways, all the while somehow still putting out amazing blogs. So I know a lot of these farmers don't even have their own computers, or they're outsourcing that work to people like us who are working the buttons for them. But I came across a recent one from Sam that just really struck me. So, and in the meantime, if you have any questions, type them in. I'll get to those before we wrap up. And thanks again for tuning in. And we'll be having more of these. My buddy Matt from Armored Nutrition has been having a lot of fun guests as well, and I hope to be back with him soon. Glad that you guys are supporting us and tuning into us when there's so many other things to tune into. But I hope this is useful and inspiring for you at a time when we really need to come together as a community and not be um, hacked to pieces by this thing. So um, he's addressing a fragile system exposed is the title of this blog, and you can find more from Sam at pasturetoforkcom. He's got a great blog there, and you can actually order some food and stuff and get connected that way. Um, so he's starts by kind of going into all the empty shelves we're encountering right now, um, and let's just get, where did I want to start in? So he's actually talking about like there's a fear that there is sort of like a food shortage just because we're not seeing it on shelves. But it just has a lot to do with how much stores are willing to shell out to stock their shelves to the extreme that they are used to. And let's face it, I think we're all a little too used to walking into a store that just has more food and options and things than you know what to do with. More brands for one single type of product and stacked to the hilt, 10 products deep, and always being replenished to have the appearance of abundance. So now that abundance, the illusion of that abundance has been sort of dissolved by this situation, I think we're seeing what a much more realistic and maybe practical kind of food supply even looks like. Because having to stock shelves like that really leads to a lot of food waste. I can speak from experience in that and trying to save food waste that I encounter. It's not easy to keep up with, and it's not easy to move that what would have been tossed to the dumpster to good places in time, and it's crazy. So I think we're overproducing and creating this illusion of abundance. But Sam puts forth some pretty interesting figures here. We have in storage, in cold storage, frozen stocks in the U.S. as of the end of January, 480 million pounds of frozen beef, 463 million pounds of frozen pork, 1.2 billion pounds of frozen poultry, of chicken, turkey, and duck, and 1 billion pounds of cheese, 23 million pounds of butter, and 1.1 billion pounds of frozen fruit, 1.8 billion pounds of frozen vegetables. So to say that we are somehow entering this like scary phase of like food shortages is a far cry. A lot of times, as we've maybe seen in other industries like the oil industry and whatnot, artificial shortages and things are a way of gouging prices and inspiring buying and stocking up. So just be smart, be aware of the games being played right now. And in total, frozen food storage is about 8 billion pounds. So no shortage of food. Deep breath, So why are we panicking? Why do we believe that we will run out of food sometime soon? Is it all because of panic? Oh, it is all because of panic buying. And the reason for the bare shelves is not due to a lack of food items, but the inability of our transport system to keep up with panic buying. And toilet paper, for God's sakes, people. You can't eat it. Jeez. We only have so many trucks and so many drivers, and ain't that the truth? Know that from personal experience. And they cannot make more deliveries than they currently are. So I'll move through this a little bit here. In this time, it is very important that we not only have food available, but foods that are healthy for us. Foods that feed our bodies the vital nutrients we need to promote strong immune systems and ward off challenges like the flu and coronavirus. This is why we believe so strongly in producing foods through the practice of regenerative agriculture. That is why we believe in pastured proteins. Healthy soils promote healthy foods. Healthy foods promote healthy bodies. Healthy bodies have strong and vibrant microbiomes. And this is from an Amish farmer, mind you. So these folks are very in tune. Don't underestimate like the humble folks of our world that seem a little detached. They are very much in tune with what's going on and can offer a really much needed, unique outsider's perspective. How do we still how do we instill confidence in a system that is 1,500 miles away, being a food system? The answer is, of course, you don't. The solution, instead, is to identify local farmers and ranchers who are applying the principles and rules of soil health. Go to their farms, see for yourself. Is the farm alive? Can you smell the flowers? Do you see a diverse abundance of plants and animals? Can you hear the buzz of honeybees and other insects? What are they growing? Is it only one or two crops, or is it a cornucopia of plenty? Most importantly, find out if they are feeding their own family what they grow. So a crisis often becomes a wake-up call, and the current corona outbreak is that wake-up call and must result in a serious re-examination of our food system. And so that's a great parting thought to leave you with. I hope you'll join me as I continue to explore all these wonderful facets of food and lifestyle, and ultimately the wellness and the vibrant health that those practices can provide for you. Reach out anytime if you'd like to get connected with farmers. As a Western Price chapter leader, I keep a running list of farms in the areas. And if you're not in my area, I've got a chapter leader in mind for you that we can connect you with. And they've got a great running list in their area. We also like to include markets, artisanal vendors, fermenters, soap makers, deodorant makers, and even holistic doctors and naturopaths, chiropractors, holistic dentists, etc. And we're always welcoming if you happen to know folks that deserve to be on the list. We'll vet them and get them on. So, yeah, thanks for tuning in. I'm not seeing any questions, so we'll catch you next time. You can always message me if you'd rather it be a private exchange, which are always great. So take care, be well, and love thy neighbors right now. Be nice to everybody. Shame on shamers. You know, everybody's doing the best they can right now. We all have a lot of pressure on us, and we each have a unique set of new problems because somebody moved our cheese. And I posted this earlier on my timeline. Check out Who Moved My Cheese if you need a little insight on how to deal with sudden change. And learning a great phrase that I've learned since grade school was from a teacher back then: adapt, improvise, and overcome. So I advise you to meditate on that and take action on that. All right, be well. I'm going to head out. All right, take care.